I'm Kieran Ongley, MajorTim.space 2022 to 2023, 10 to 12 Young Ambassador. Eva, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Eva Raghavendra, the MajorTim.space 2022 to 2023, STEM for Her Young Ambassador.
Today we are interviewing Keith Haviland. Keith, will you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, Kieran and Eva. I'm Keith, and I have made some films about space. So I think that's why I've been invited to talk to you too.
So Keith, out of all the documentaries you've made with Haviland Digital, which one did you enjoy the most? Enjoy producing the most? What one meant the most to you?
Well, that's but it's a really difficult question because I've enjoyed all of them, I think. So, I made one about mission control. So the people in the mission control room who supported the astronauts as they were going to the moon and around the moon. And actually, that was a really good experience. So I met lots of people, including the people who helped Apollo 13. So maybe I singled that one out because that's a kind of different perspective.
Eva, do you have a question for Keith?
So, as a child growing up, did you have any role models?
Well, that is another interesting question, and I need to think about it for a few seconds. But I was born on the 1st of October 1958, and that was the day that NASA started operating and became an organization. And so in the 60s, I was a young kid, and that was the age of the space race. And so space was really fashionable. It was really exciting to be growing up in that period. And the people I kind of followed and looked up to were, I guess, the Apollo astronauts. And then I was 10 when Apollo 11 landed, the first landing on the moon. So that was really exciting to see that on a tiny black and white television as it was happening live. Good, that's a good question, Eva.
Thank you.
So Keith, what inspired you to create Haviland Digital?
So I just wanted to get into films. I mean, I've worked for a long time for a technology company doing IT work, and that was fantastic. But I decided I wanted to be more creative, and so I wanted to move into filmmaking as a kind of experiment. And because of my growing up experience I mentioned before, I mean, spaceflight is something I just love to think about and to talk about. And so the first films I started finding opportunities with were all about space. I've made other things since, but getting to know some of the astronauts as part of the process, getting to make the mission control film, it was all fantastic experiences. So that was the motivation. Do something more creative, but to make films about space flight.
Yeah. So I'm assuming then that is why to you they're much more unique and much more different than a normal documentary.
So they are more specialized, that's true. And I mean, I do think space is becoming fashionable again. Would you agree? I think people love space. You've got Artemis going around the moon as we make the interview. So it's a long way from Earth, that robotic probe. You get all those SpaceX reusable rockets that take off and then come back to land. And to me, that really seems like science fiction. That really seems like we are beginning to live in the future. Really exciting. And so I think my films are specialized, but it's becoming something that excites young people again, as it did in the 1960s.
Yeah.
So did you always wanted a career in technology?
No. So when I was studying, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And so I studied most things. I ended up specializing in mathematics and engineering. And then I wondered what I should do next. So I took an IT job as a kind of temporary measure. But of course, when I was graduating, IT was becoming a really big thing. So you had the first personal computers, you had networking becoming serious. I mean, this was before the internet. When I started working in IT, the internet came along really in the late 80s and 90s. And so I kind of adopted IT accidentally, but I had a really good career working with some really nice people doing interesting things. And then later on, I wanted to be a bit more creative.
That's very cool. So about what you said earlier, do you think, do you have anything planned, with Haviland Digital for like about Artemis in the future?
Well, yes. So we've just made a little short film. It's 23 minutes long, and it's to celebrate a mission called Apollo 17. Have you heard of Apollo 17? That
Yeah.
Apollo mission. So in December, it's 50 years since Apollo 17 launched and went to the moon. And it was commanded by a man called Gene Cernan, who's now passed away, but he's a friend of mine. So yeah, I was very close to Gene. I got to know him over the years. And we've made a little short film, which is just about Apollo 17 that celebrates him. And what we have from previous work, and it's never been seen before, is Gene's words to the next Americans to walk on the moon. So we made a little short film that's mostly about Apollo 17, but it ends with Gene talking, and we've intercut that little speech he makes at the end to the next astronauts with Artemis footage. And so it's kind of handing over the baton from Apollo to Artemis. So that's the first time we've covered Artemis in a film, and I'm delighted. I'm really pleased that in Houston they're going to use that little film to celebrate Apollo 17. So we have a special showing on December the 16th, and I think that Charlie Duke could be there. Charlie Duke was an Apollo astronaut, and he was the one who was speaking to Neil Armstrong when Neil landed on the moon, and he's going to be there to celebrate the last Apollo with us in Houston. So that's a really nice thing.
Yeah, that's very cool. But yeah, also I can see that our background's Artemis as well.
Sorry, say that again. You're the background for the recording. Yeah. And I think that's the launch of Artemis, isn't it? Going up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And have you been following Artemis?
Yeah.
Because you had a live feed yesterday where you could see the spacecraft and then the Earth and the Moon together. Did you see that?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it is really cool.
I heard that you had a long technology and business career and was senior managing director for Accenture's technology services.
Yes.
That was a very successful career. So can you tell us more about it?
So I started in IT by doing things like programming, the usual sort of things that people do. And I worked with languages like C and Unix. And those sound really old fashioned, but actually a lot of those are still around. But as I grew older, I kind of moved into more management positions, and I joined Accenture in 1990 and then helped them become very international. So I was able to link teams up, in Europe, in the USA, in India, the Philippines, China. So what I helped build them was a global organization that could pull people and teams from around the world to work together. And that's very powerful in this day and age to get the best of capabilities from many different places in the world. And that was the essence of what I did. And it was a really enjoyable time. I was working with great people in different countries. It was a lot of travel, though, too much travel. And I ended up flying to different places every 2 weeks. So it was a demanding part of my life, but I really enjoyed getting to know the world.
So Keith, did you building on what Eva said earlier about whether you knew that you was going to be a documentary producer, did you like documentaries as a kid? Was it something that you dedicated time to?
So I've always liked film. I've always enjoyed watching film, and documentaries are part of that. And the first film I really remember seeing was in 1968 when my dad took me to see a film called 2001: A Space Odyssey. Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
Yes, it's a really interesting, quite abstract film, but for its time, incredible special effects. So it really took you out of the Earth into space. It felt it was a really kind of great thing to see on a big screen, and a fantastic experience when I was really young. And I like musicals, I like gangster films, I like science fiction films, I like drama films, I like all sorts of films. But I've always liked documentary as well. And I think if you want to talk about space, then either you can make a really big budget film, and maybe one day I'll do that, like Gravity, for example, with Sandra Bullock. That's a really expensive drama film, but actually can tell many exciting stories through documentaries, particularly if
Yeah.
you get to speak to people who were there making history. So I've met most of the Apollo astronauts. I've spoken to the people in mission control. I know a lot of people who flew in on the space shuttle, and it's a real privilege to be able to go and talk to those people. So if you like, that's the big perk of my documentary job, is meeting really interesting people who've helped make history.
Yeah. Eva, do you have another question for Keith?
So, do you miss like any of your parts of your old career in technology?
I do. I miss the team, which is what some great people, but we've all stayed friends, and so we get together regularly. And we had a big party in London in May, a big reunion, and about 100 people turned up for people I used to work with. So, not only did we do some good work together, we also became friends. So in a way, I'm still connected to those people. And some of them have helped me make films as well because they're interested in filmmaking space. So if you get a really good job, you end up being part of a good family of people who help each other and stay connected.
I suppose it kind of doing a job like that, doing a job such as like making documentaries or something, since like you and all the film crew and everything would have to work together, I suppose it would bring you closer as well.
Yeah, that's very true. That's a very good insight. So a documentary is a small team, but it is a team, and you might have 10 people in the core of the film doing the work, but you have to get dozens of other people involved. So if you want a musical score, you have to get a composer, and you have to hire musicians, and you have to get that recorded, and then you have to get it mixed and turned into a soundtrack. So that can be a lot of people you only have for a few days, but it's a very satisfying and creative thing. And so that's a team effort. If you're making a big feature film, it's hundreds of people sometimes for the big Hollywood stuff. So teaming and being able to manage people and manage projects is such a key skill. And something I find interesting is in the old days, film was a very physical medium, made out of chemicals, and he used to wind it on a reel, and he used to develop it in chemicals, and editing was actually physically clipping the film.
Yeah.
He made a big version of the film for showing on projectors in cinemas, but these days it's all software. a digital camera. People will edit on a computer. They do the sound design on a computer, and they produce something. So that. Let me see if I can get it in the camera. Can you see that? Let me try that again. Can you see that little disc about the size of a Mars bar? That's a film. It's a whole film on that you can show in a big cinema. That's shown in IMAX. And it once would have been reels of film, about 2 feet across. And now you can get a film on something thinner than a Mars bar.
So I've heard that you make movies on sport, science, and drama. I was wondering which area is your favourite.
So, I mean, I've made space films more than anything else, but I did a film once called Dying Laughing, which is about stand-up comedy. We got to interview lots of really famous comedians like Billy Connolly, Victoria Wood, Chris Rock, Jerry Lewis, Seinfeld, names for the last 20 years, 30 years of stand-up comedy. That was fun. And then we've made a film about football, and that was a serious film, but it was an interesting process to make it. And I think 2 other films that I've made are about planes in the Second World War. So one was about the Spitfire, and one was about the Lancaster. And both those have been quite successful. And I think Lancaster is currently on Sky.
So for you, I mean, for you, what makes documentaries like? I mean, I haven't heard your opinion on it, but I mean, what makes documentaries for you? So why have you made more documentaries than films? Do you think documentaries are like more unique than films, or?
So that's a good question. And what we make, the films we make are called feature documentaries. So a documentary can be like a 20-minute thing on television about a really simple subject done in a very simple way. But a feature documentary is meant to be more like a proper Hollywood film. So about 90 to 100 minutes. We get a composer to create a score, and we have musicians who record the music. So there's an emotional journey in the music, get taken on by the film. We spend a lot of time making the film look fantastic. So in terms of color, in terms of quality of footage, in terms of the quality of the sound, we make it look fantastic. So the idea is people can watch these in cinemas or on television, but also in cinemas, and have a really emotional experience like they're watching a Disney or a Marvel film. And so a feature documentary is meant to have the kind of sense of scale and grandeur that a full feature film does.
Yeah.
So we try to make films that are bigger and longer and more emotional.
So could you tell us more about how you got involved with the production team of the film The Last Man on the Moon?
So that was kind of where I started in film, and that is another good question, Eva. And so I had become friends with Gene Cernan, who was the commander of Apollo 17. We've spoken about him before. And he was in London. And he was in London to talk to a film crew who were making this documentary about his life. And so I went to dinner with Gene and the film crew, and we got talking, and I got involved, and I gave them some help in terms of expertise. And so it was just a personal introduction via Gene Cernan. And it took the director of Last Man on the Moon, it took him 5 years to persuade Gene to make the film. And Gene's final conversation that made him decide to do the film was with an actor called Harrison Ford. Have you ever heard of Harrison Ford?
No.
So he was Han Solo in Star Wars.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So he was a friend of Gene, and he said to Gene, this film isn't about you. It's about how anybody with enough ambition and hard work can do something wonderful. So you're setting an example for kids and other people. And so it was that conversation with the famous star that made him want to do the film. And I got involved later on.
Um, I'm actually a big fan of Star Wars.
Yes,
Same.
it's been going a long time. I remember seeing the first one when it
Yeah.
first came out in 1977.
Yeah.
Go on, Eva.
It's fine. You can.
Okay, I just want to say, looking at where you're sitting right now, I'm assuming you're a Doctor Who fan.
I was a Doctor Who fan. I am a Doctor Who fan, and there is a large model of a Dalek behind me.
So what what do you need to, for anyone that's wanting to be a producer of documentaries, do you need like any specific skills to produce documentaries? What do you need to do to become a documentary producer?
So, I mean, for young people who want to get into film, I mean, it's a big industry. There's lots of opportunity, but I think there's now a kind of route where you can study certain subjects at A level or specialize in film for a degree later on. So you can specialize in filmmaking and learn skills like camera work or editing or directing or production as part of your academic career. And there are lots of schemes around to introduce young people to filmmaking and get them their first experiences on a set. So this is talking about people who are 16, 17, 18 onwards, but those schemes do exist. And I think because the UK film industry is quite an important one, particularly in London, if you go through the BFI, British Film Institute, and other institutions, you can find lots of opportunities to get training experience. So, hard work, a bit of study, and then getting that experience is the route I think that I recommend to young people. And there is a lot of opportunity in this country.
While I was doing my research for the interview, I looked at the Haviland digital logo. It looks really cool. It looks like the planet Saturn. So is there any interesting story around how the logo came to be?
So I mean, I think you've got it. I mean, we wanted a logo that was very simple and pretty, but also suggested an interest in spaceflight. And so the logo is based on the planet Saturn. So it's a little circle with a ring around it. That's a really simple symbol that says the subject is space, because everybody knows what Saturn looks like. So I think your question had the answer inside it.
So how long have you been a documentary producer, and also how long have you not actually got into it, but like how long have you?
So my first career would have been about 30 years in technology. Seems a long time to me, so it must seem a very long time to the two of you. And I've been working on documentaries for about 8 years. And I've made about 12 films.
Well, that must be a very good experience.
Yes, it's been fun.
Yeah. What was out of all of your time, whether it was in documentaries or in your old like computing job, what was the like highlight of your time?
Well, I mean, I can't single out a single moment or a single period, but in general, working with really nice people, doing something that has value and is worthwhile, so has a purpose, is just always a great experience. And making sure you work hard enough and long enough to get to do something well, be it a piece of software or a marvelous film, is great. And I think it's particularly good if you share it as part of a team. So most things that we achieve in life and most things that that people achieve in the world are done through the hard work of teams, not just individuals. So I think working with a good team is always a fantastic experience.
Yeah. Eva, do you want to ask a question?
So I have heard you are involved in helping startup space business. So can you tell us more about that?
So there's a friend of mine who is based in New York and he works in financial investments, and he's another one with a passion about space, and so he set up a venture capital company. There's a big phrase, but he set up a company that invests in people like SpaceX. He's invested in a company called Planet, and Planet have all these satellites that take pictures of the planet and sell them. So it's very easy to find what's going on anywhere these days via the satellites. And he works on there's 22 new companies in the world, and their mission is to get hardware to land on the moon, which is amazing, is it? 22 companies are working to get things to the moon, and he's involved with some of those, and I've given him some help. So it's only a small part of what I've done in the last few years, but my friend Chad has got a really strong interest, and he's helping these companies get curated, and then he helps them grow. And some of them will be very successful, I think.
So how do you manage like documentaries financial budget, especially if special effects are used and stuff?
Well, so you always need to make sure you know how much the film is worth and how much you can get people to pay for it in terms of showing it on streaming platforms or television. And that sets some parameters. And then you need to create a budget that fits within it. And there's some things you can't do. So special effects are hard for a documentary. I'll give you one interesting example. And so there's a film called First Man about Neil Armstrong. That's a feature film from 2019. And that's got a sequence around a mission called Gemini 8. And so what the feature film did was in Hollywood, they built a full-size model that could take the actors, and that model was mounted on a special device that rotated it and moved it around. So that would have cost millions of dollars, and we couldn't afford that. So instead, what we did, we went to the Smithsonian, which is the big museum in the US, and we got permission from the Smithsonian to put a camera inside the original capsule Gemini 8. So we put the camera very carefully inside the original capsule, and then we put a strobe light outside that spun, that created a sense of the spinning Earth, which was a major event in the history of this particular mission, which went wrong. And so we couldn't afford to build a model, so we used real spacecraft, which I think is a quite neat way of being cost effective.
Yeah, and how much how much money does it take to make a documentary?
Well, it depends. You can make a documentary about something in your personal life for not very much at all, and spend your own time and your own equipment. And some people do that really successfully. Or you could spend $2 million if you want to make something a really grand affair with special effects. So basically, it's from zero to a few million. And you get documentaries of every type.
The former patron of the MajorTim.space was Warden. He was a technical advisor at the film First Man.
Yeah, so I mentioned the film First Man, and Al Warden was one of the crew for Apollo 15. So, he was somebody who's helped with this MajorTim.space before, and he just was also involved with the film I was speaking about. So that's a good point.
So given the choice, would you prefer to miss a project's deadline in order to make the documentary perfect, or meet the deadline but compromise the quality of the production?
That's a very good question, and quite a mature question, Kieran, because these are choices you have to make in business, and it's a kind of a balance. And I think that, no film is ever quite perfect, but you take it to a certain level where it's really, really good. And I think the ambition of the people I work with is to really make sure that films are fantastic to watch, have great storytelling, have great music. So that's what we want. That's what we try to do. Sometimes there are just simply deadlines you have to meet. So we made this little film to celebrate Apollo 17's 50th. And that's in December, that 50th anniversary. So we have to have it finished by December, which we have done. We couldn't deliver that in January. That'd be silly. So sometimes there are just deadlines you can't change, but we absolutely always try to do things really to a high level of quality.
Yeah. And has there been any, for you personally, has there been any times that you haven't been able to meet deadlines and compromise the quality? Or
with films, no, I don't think so. And I think there've been plenty of difficult situations to deal with. So, for example, sometimes the material gets lost. So somebody's not done a backup and the original has failed, and that doesn't happen that often, but it does happen. And then you have to think, do I reshoot it, or do I find a way of dealing without a particular sequence? So you do get problems, but I think most times we've managed to get things done on time.
So where can we watch all your films?
Well, in different places. So, for a long time, Mission Control and Last Man on the Moon were on Netflix, but Netflix don't keep things forever, so they're now not on Netflix. But you can either buy them on a streaming platform, like iTunes or Amazon, or in some cases you can buy the DVDs. If you wanted to watch Lancaster, that's on Sky, but you can also buy the DVDs if you wanted to. And Spitfire, I think you can download it on a streaming platform. You can also buy DVDs. So things change over time. I think most of the films you can find a way of watching either via a streaming platform or on DVDs. So that DVDs are going out of fashion really quickly. So I think in the future it will all be streaming everything.
So, have any of your documentaries ever been shown in cinemas?
Yeah, most of them have been. And so Last Man on the Moon was shown mostly in the US, and we had cinemas in Houston, and we had cinemas in New York and Los Angeles showing it. So not many, but a few. And in Houston, we had a special showing at the NASA facility, and somebody said, "Can anybody who's an astronaut stand up?" And most of the audience seemed to be astronauts. That was amazing. All the astronauts came to see the film, which was fantastic. All the shuttle astronauts, and then Mission Control was shown in some cinemas in the US, and also at a film festival. There are lots of big film festivals. There's one called South by Southwest in Texas, in Austin, and we had the film showing there. So I think most of the films will have small cinema showings, and then they would go on to streaming or television.
Hmm.
What is the current project that you're working on?
So we've got 4 projects on the go, 5 projects on the go actually, in different stages. And so I've mentioned the one about Apollo 17, and that will be shown soon. And then I'm working with an old friend of mine on a horror film, which is, not the subject of today, but that's coming out next year. And then I've got a film in progress about a very famous female astronaut, but I can't mention that yet in terms of the name. And then one on interplanetary missions, so the robot spacecraft that go to Mars and Jupiter and Saturn to come back to Saturn. And then we've got a project that is in early days, but about something called Apollo 1. And Apollo 1 was a fire which killed, I'm afraid, 3 astronauts, but it was a really big event in the history of the space race. And so we want to make a very sensitive film about that.
So what was the last documentary you've worked on?
So the one about Apollo 17 is coming out. The one before then was about the Lancaster aircraft, and that came out in May. And then it's been on Sky for the last couple of months.
Eva, do you have another question for Keith?
We know that you're a published author, so can you tell us about that side of work?
So that's a long time ago, but when I was in IT, I wrote some technology books. So I wrote a book about digital terminology, like a dictionary, and I wrote a book about Unix system programming, which is not that interesting, but it's good if you want to do some technical work. But yeah, this was all a long time ago.
Do you miss we've talked about your old job. Do you miss your being a publisher or
So not so
writing
much.
books?
I mean, instead of books, I have moved to filmmaking, which is working with a team and a lot of effort, but very fulfilling. So I guess I've replaced books with filmmaking. A book is a lot of effort, and people say it's 5% inspiration and 95% perspiration. So you can have the idea, you can create the skeleton of the book, but then writing it and then getting it checked in detail and doing things like creating an index, it's really quite hard work. And so you should do a book only if you have a real passion for the subject.
I see that you have a university degree in mathematics. So how does that help you with what you do as a career now?
That's a really good question. I mean, mathematics can be really abstract, but in the end, in any part of life, particularly when you look after money and people, being able to understand how numbers fit together is really important. So being able to manage a budget and know where you are in terms of spend is really important. Being able to structure a plan, which is logical, is important. So it gives you kind of grounding in some key skills.
So all right. Eva, do you have any more questions for Keith?
Yeah, I've got a few left. So I've heard you have the Guinness World Record for largest paper sculpture made up of photographs. That sounds awesome. So can you tell us about how it started and how long it took?
So in my old company, when I was doing the technology work, we used to have a photography competition with the team. And we had a lot of people in the team. And so we had thousands and thousands of entries every year. And some of the photographs were really good. And I decided we should try to do something that was record breaking. So we asked everybody to send in a kind of self-portrait, and you could do it properly with the phone, or you could use the camera on your PC. We just wanted to collect as many self-portraits as possible. And we got a few tens of thousands. It was a very big team, and we got a lot of entries. And then we found this paper sculptor who lived in India, and he built something like in the shape of a pyramid that was about 30 feet tall. And the little individual points of the pyramid were portraits of people in the team. So it was a very kind of abstract shape, but it was, if you looked at detail, you could see the people in the team. And that was large enough to get, at the time, a Guinness World Record. So behind me, I can't show it, but behind me, there's a certificate for that hanging on the wall. It was some fun, but it got people to like interact with each other.
So we've talked about you've covered like how to get to the documentary stage, but would you have like any other like specific advice if like young people wanted to pursue a career in film?
So I'll go back to some of the things I said earlier, because I think there's a lot of opportunity in this country in filmmaking and media. I think you always need a passion for that sort of thing. So if you want to be creative and do that sort of thing, that's great. And there's lots of options at GCSE or whatever the terminology is these days level, to A levels to study those subjects. And then there are lots of specialist practical courses at degree level or at a technical level you can also study. And then plenty of schemes to get young people their first work experience. And again, I'm talking about people beyond 16. But there's a very attractive set of things you can get involved with over the years. But I think if you want to pick up a camera and use the camera and experiment, then always do that. That's a great way to get started, is just playing around with the technology and your creativity.
Yeah. Eva, do you have any more questions for Keith?
What would your message be for children who like being creative and like technology as well?
Well, isn't that a wonderful question? I mean, there are so many things that combine the two. I mean, my younger daughter, is studying photography, and she loves to use things to edit, to change, to create new things from real things. You see what I mean? In filmmaking, there are so many tools to simplify, capture real images, but also create things in special effect terms. If you've got a musical inclination, then you're working in film and television is a great way to get your music listened to as you develop the skills and get able to compose through a career. And so I think technology is one of those things that really amplifies the ability to create things from scratch or transform things that already exist. So it's a wonderful area, and and technology and apps gets more and more fundamentally interesting and important every day, don't they? So it's a great area to work in as a young person.
So what are your plans for future documentaries then?
So I've mentioned like 5 in current production. So that will take up quite a number of years of work, and so that is, pretty much planned out. And I think all of them are likely to come off. And beyond that, I've got lots of different ideas. Probably got a list of 20 or 30 things for documentaries and other sorts of film. And we just have to get through the current set of work and then see if the ideas are still relevant. So I
Yeah.
think looking at the impact of technology on life in the sense of business or social or personal aspects. I mean, there's so much you could say about that. Technology is everywhere. We're using technology to talk, and this wouldn't have been possible, 5-10 years ago. But we're using technology to have this particular discussion, and the ability to do these things will just get bigger and bigger. So I think looking at technology as a subject is something I'd like to do at some point.
Yeah. So then, sorry, one sec. Out of the ones you've got going now, how long do you think they'll take to come out?
So I think I've got enough work for the next 2 to 4 years. So it's quite a long time.
Yeah.
And so what normally happens in this sort of area is you have different projects at different stages. So one will come out in 18 months, one will come out in 4 years, the others in between. But normally you need to keep things working in parallel and then focus on one where it's got the most developed idea, you've got the right funding, people want to see it, and then you really focus on that. But in parallel, we've always got plans for the future also being developed.
Yeah. Eva, have you got any more questions for Keith?
No, I don't have any more questions.
Okay. Then thank you so much for this incredible interview, Keith. It's been absolutely fantastic and such an honour to meet with you.
Yeah, and it's been really great fun to speak to you, Kieran, and you, Eva. You've asked some really lovely questions, and it's been a really enjoyable interview. So thank you very much. It's been an honour and a privilege to talk to the two of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.